Okay, everyone, so it's been a little over a year since we last did a PlayStation Now review video, finally giving the service a fair shake, and it's also been over a year since Sony and Microsoft announced that partnership, if you remember that. This is where Sony will be utilizing Microsoft's Azure Cloud data centers. And while today we have PlayStation 5, it has PlayStation Now support, so let's revisit the service and find out if it's gotten any better on Sony's brand new console. So to start us off, we'll actually take a look at the PlayStation Now tab, which, much like the PlayStation Store or PlayStation Plus, it's not an application you start, it's pretty much baked right into the user experience, and so you can just tab down and we're pretty much ready to go. We can see all the content items and either start streaming or perhaps subscribe right away. And this is where we can immediately talk about just the discoverability, seeing the content that is available. So you can see these are must-see on PlayStation Now, which are more prominent, well-known games, but you can see down here recently added, so this is also pretty handy. It doesn't take long to see what was just added to the service, and so if you're constantly using PS Now, you can get a good bird's eye view of all the recent additions alongside whatever else you may have been playing. Like your recently played right here, so these are all the titles that I've been testing and some of the direct captures that you'll see in a minute here. And then we have a recommendation based off of what we've been playing. I see mine are pretty interesting. And then last chance to play, this is also handy. These are games that will be leaving the service. They do have an expiration date, and so there are certain premium games that will leave at some point. And here's where we can re-up our subscription if we wanted to. This is where we can actually talk about looking for content, right? And so if we go to browse, there are a decent amount of filters that we can do here, like most downloaded, A to Z, Z to A, release date. Genre actually is a decent amount. There's a lot you can do here. There is 800 plus games, and so discoverability is a concern. You may not even realize what games are available on this. That's the problem I've noticed with PlayStation Now so far, is that it feels like it's pieced together in a lot of separate ways because there's a lot of inconsistencies with search in general on PlayStation Now. So there's a favoriting system where you can favorite a bunch of games, but that is completely separate from how it's handled in your game library. So much like how it was handled on PS4, when you start a game, whether it's PS3 or PS4, it will show up in your main row of icons as a content item that you've played previously. Even though it's a link to streaming it, it will show up there. When you play a game on PS4 first, then go over to PS5, the link is destroyed for favoriting that game, so you can no longer take advantage of the favorites list if you started a game previously on PS4. It's quite weird. And then I've noticed that Uncharted 3 doesn't show up in the browse section. You have to manually search for that. I don't know why that doesn't show up. And then another weird issue is that there are many games that are duplicated, the PS3 and PS4 version, and this happens a little too frequently for my liking. Out of the 800 plus titles in PS Now, there's a lot of situations where the PS3 and PS4 version is present, and we know that on PlayStation Now you can download the PS4 games. So ideally, you would want to download first more than anything before streaming. You'll see in the streaming tests why you're probably going to want to always download the game if possible, but it seems to bloat the library. I don't think there'd ever be a scenario where you'd want to stream the PlayStation 3 version. Which, to add an extra layer on top of this, sometimes only the PS3 version is available and not the PS4 copy that you know exists and would be more desirable to play. And this could be a publisher issue, but we have another example, like Uncharted. There is an Uncharted collection on PS4, high frame rate, high resolution. That's not available. That's a Sony IP. They could have put it here. Instead, their only option is the PS3 versions. Not really what you'd want to do. Another odd circumstance I ran into is how these games are treated based off of your first interaction with them. So for PS4 games, ideally you do want to download these, you get the full frame rate, full res, no input lag, things like that. But if you do say stream something before you download it, the next time you visit that game's main page, there is no option to download it. It's gone. So you have to hit the three main dots there to hit view product. You see its full page, and then all the buttons return. And for a while, I didn't know what the problem was. I felt like every time I started a PS4 game, I just removed that link entirely, but that is something that you do have to do. This is already akin to how we're seeing people play previous gen version games when they should be entitled to the next gen PS5 copy. There's a really weird situation behind the scenes with how the game library is actually treating the titles that you play and interact with. Now, let's talk about the act of actually streaming games. Sony recommends at least 5 megabits per second down, but as we've seen in my previous video, that's going to give you a bad experience. You're going to want at least 15, 20, possibly more than that. The minimum should be much higher here, and always hardwire, of course. This will give you the best possible connection, the lowest latency, and it's interesting for PS5 because I tested both wireless and wired, and I think because of the Wi-Fi 6 in PS5, that's what's given this console the ability to reach the upper end of what my ISP provides. So for my home network, I top off at about 110 down, 10 up. My ping is anywhere from 40 to 20 milliseconds, so quite good there. Ideally, I'd want to be closer to 20. But whether it's wired or hardwired, I'm reaching the very end of what my ISP provides. So that's good, although hardwired still in that situation would always be better if you can do it. Now, when playing PS3 games, for those that don't know how this works, you're remotely controlling and accessing a PS3 console from Sony's end, and their machines are a bit different compared to, say, the standard retail units that you may have had before. Their console offers a simplified XMB that you need to access for certain PS3 functions. So to bring this up, you access the one activity card that's available for PlayStation Now streaming. You can show or hide this XMB, and when you bring it up, this is where you can do things like trophy hunting, for example. So this is very much acting as though it's your own personal local PS3 that's just living in the cloud. You can trophy hunt, but you have to make sure that you sync your trophies from this XMB because that's where they live, just like how trophies would live on a local PS3. Same with save files. You can even see that when we're in this menu, it looks like a standard PS3 console with the XMB waves in the background. But here's where we would manage the files so we could delete them or even move them to Plus Cloud storage, which is important to note. They're not automatically in Plus storage. This is something where it's almost like having two separate banks. PlayStation Now is its own entity, and you could, in theory, move some of these files over to Plus Cloud storage, get on a regular PS3, pull it from Plus, and then continue it through local play. For the friends list, you might need to access this for certain multiplayer games on PS3 where there's an invite system built into the XMB, and keep in mind that you can't even message friends from a PS5 or PS4 anyway, so I know it's natural to think, let me just use the PS5's built-in friends list, but that console can no longer contact PS3 friends, so if you want to do that, again, has to go through this simplified XMB. But this is actually a good time to bring this up. So for PS5 specific features, there's not a whole lot here. The create button does not work. You can't share, broadcast, no screenshots, nothing like that. There's no game hub functionality, so PS3 games will appear on the home screen, but it's just a generic background. There's only one activity card that's for PS Now streaming options or bringing up the XMB. But there is one thing, and that's DualSense functionality. So we've already seen that you can plug in a DualSense to an actual PS3 and it'll work just fine, but PS3 just inherently can recognize many controllers on a generic level where it accepts inputs and that's about it. But when playing through PlayStation Now, the DualSense is officially supported, meaning the controller has the chance to use its software-level interpretation for haptic feedback. So if you're playing a PS3 game with standard rumble functionality, this is somewhat converted to different sensations through haptic feedback. It's not perfect, but it definitely feels different compared to, say, using a DualShock 3 and feeling your standard low or large motor rumbles. For streaming PS4 games, this is a similar circumstance in that you're remotely controlling a PS4 console from Sony's end, but there is tighter integration because PS5 is backwards compatible with PS4 titles. So there is game hub functionality, you can see trophy activity cards, and if you were to use save data, this would be the same deal where it would take you to a PS4-like menu to manage that save data and possibly move it to PS Plus Cloud storage. But for PS4 games, I didn't test too many of these because we all know that these can be downloaded directly to a PS4 or a PS5 console. That's perhaps the biggest benefit to PlayStation Now if you don't care about streaming. And what's ironic here is that usually the benefit to streaming is you can jump into games without having to download or install these titles completely. But on PS4 and especially PS5, yes, the initial download will be slower, yes, it will eat up space on your local storage, but after that the game will boot much quicker, whereas on PS Now you're thrown into a queue to start the game. And then once you're in, PS4 games will look noticeably worse versus PS3 streaming, and that's due to most PS4 games running at a higher resolution. When we're at 1080p, there's more room for the streaming compression to show. As you can see at the first Bloodborne lamp, the difference becomes much more pronounced. That, and you're also sacrificing PS4 Pro level enhancements or PS5 boosting the performance. PS Now is playing these games just as they were on a PS4, capped at 1080p, 60 frames per second. So you're much better off downloading these. PS3 is where I spent a lot more time because for many people this is the cutoff. You'd need a PS3 console and games to play them, or you can start streaming today. And arguably, PS3 is in a better, albeit tight position. For most of the PS3 library, games run at 720p, so looking at the footage I have, depending on the game, it actually looks quite close to native play. There's not as much damage the compression can do at this lower resolution, but it is worth noting I was surprised at how well my captures actually turned out, because when it's right in front of you on a TV, it does look worse, trust me. The Sly Collection was a good showcase here. The cel-shaded art direction of these games with all the hard lines and solid colors can show the compression better. Take a look at Sly Cooper's blue torso compared to the local version. Under streaming, it looks like the entire game was applied with a noise filter, and a lot of our more precise lines in the environment are softened. But that's actually something that can make certain games look okay. Sometimes a title will have a lot of jaggies, and the compression can soften this inadvertently. But again, when it's right in front of you, this isn't exactly a kind effect. And when I went to film all the native footage, everything looked so much better, even for a game like Infamous, which, trust me, I love this game, but visually it does not hold up very well.
I thought you were gonna watch TV.
Batteries are dead again. You mind putting on a freak show?
Sure. I'm glad it's good for something.
Probably need to charge them all. TV's a hog.
Now, the one thing you may have noticed is that in this test I've made sure to try all these games over Wi-Fi and Ethernet. In the last video I only did Wi-Fi, and the reason for that was, well, these services have to work over Wi-Fi. We all know a long connection is better, but if these major companies want streaming to take off, it has to work over Wi-Fi so the consumer doesn't even have to think about it. And that is still true, but I did want to see if I could improve the noticeable latency. And at least from a visual perspective, you've probably noticed that by now there isn't much of a difference between Wi-Fi or Ethernet. At a certain point, regardless of connection, it looks like the download speed is in excess because this is more than likely as good as it's going to get. As for latency, this was disappointing because it was there under both conditions. Now don't get me wrong, it was slight. In fact, it probably could have been improved on a different display, but there's absolutely a slight delay, and depending on what you're playing, it either feels like it isn't there at all, or it makes the game become unplayable. And to be honest, generally speaking, everything was playable, but it's playable in the same way an open source emulator would classify a game as playable. You can do it, but expect some hiccups. You can actually see I tried playing games online, which you can do, and by the way, you don't need to be a Plus member, so if you did want to say subscribe to PS Now, download PS4 games, play them online, you can do that with just a PS Now membership, no Plus required. Anyway, when I tried Killzone, I was bad, and I mean really bad, but when I went to Doom, this is where I actually held my own, and that's surprising for a game that is a lot faster paced compared to Killzone.
Secured zone. Avenger, Defender.
So, with PS3 games, even PS Now demonstrates the harsh realities of that console. It's stuck, that's why it needs an XMB and is rather limited. PS4 streaming is also made completely irrelevant with the download option, so where does that leave us? Simply put, the service still needs work. Mind you, we're talking about the streaming capabilities. I still think this is a great deal on its own for 300 plus PS4 games to download, but when it comes to streaming, the input latency is a hurdle. And to make PS4 streaming content relevant, Sony would probably be better off making a major upgrade to their network and utilizing customized remote PS5s to take advantage of boosted performance. That and the eventuality of offering PS5 games to stream. As someone who loves physical media, I still think there's massive potential here. When you look at all the games, and when you think about spanning across PS1, 2, 3, 4, and now 5, there's a wealth of market opportunity for Sony, but Sony isn't there. Microsoft isn't, Google isn't, and the consumer isn't either. But that's something that you probably already knew while watching this. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have not yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in the next one. You take it easy.